Hello, folks, and welcome back to Chris Wyatt Reports. The grisly, horrific situation unfolding in Limpopo province over the purported shooting of two women who were then tossed into a pigsty is raising attention across South Africa. News headlines are all over the place today talking about the Limpopo trio accused of killing two women and tossing their bodies into a pigsty remain in custody over the weekend. Zachariah Olafia, 60, owner of the Onverwacht farm in Limpopo, Adrian de Wet, 19, and William Musaro, 45, were arrested after the decomposing bodies of Maria Machado, 47, and Lucia Ndlovu, 34, were found in a pigsty on Olafia's farm. Now, the nature of the grisly situation has rightly angered community members. If true, it would appear to be a callous series of acts. Unfortunately, initially, the South African media, naturally led by the Independent Online, likely omitted facts or distorted information and context relevant to the case. Now, none of which are likely to diminish the potentially horrific outcome here, but nonetheless are relevant, such as trespass and theft. What else have they neglected to share with the public? Olafier's lawyer, advocate Jacobus Johannes Venter, told the court on Friday, August 30th, that he was only able to consult with his client immediately prior to the proceedings and was made aware that his client made a formal statement while in prison custody. Venter also said the statement was taken without his constitutional rights in mind or his attorney present. At no point was he granted an opportunity to call his attorney, and I was not aware he made any statement until I consulted this morning. It is concerning, Venter said. Indeed, this is a constitutionally protected right in South Africa, and dare we say, human rights. And that will come in play later on. Now, this sounds potentially like a coerced statement by law enforcement. As I said, protesters descended on the court to oppose bail for the three accused of killing Limpopo women and feeding them to pigs. Dressed in economic freedom fighters and African National Congress political regalia, the crowd chanted slogans outside the main gates of the court precinct, waving placards. Now, while one can certainly understand why folks would be incensed over these allegations and deaths and gruesome fate of Maria Machado and Lucia Ndlovu, the near exclusive presence of ANC and EFF regalia would seem to indicate that this has far more to do with political activism than with genuine anger or grief. Two of the accused are white Afrikaans-speaking farmers. The story almost perfectly fits the propaganda narrative about white Afrikaans speakers, which both the ANC and EFF consistently spew. Now, the protesters were supported by the South African Council of Churches and the South African Human Rights Commission. The South African Human Rights Commission. It is interesting to see how the South African Human Rights Commission once again stakes out a political position, selectively outraged at crime in South Africa. The inconsistency of the organization is appalling. For instance, where was the South African Human Rights Commission leading or participating in protest marches in the barbaric murders of the following South Africans? Edward Neumeister, the owner of a German-themed restaurant, was murdered and hacked into pieces by a murderer, 67 wounds from a panga at his restaurant closed during lockdown. Brendan Horner, repeatedly stabbed and tied with a rope around his neck to a pole on Blauwkroon farm near Paul Roux in the Free State. Segofatso Pule was found shot in the chest and hanging from a tree near Rudaport. Now, Pule, a 28-year-old South African woman, was 8 months pregnant at the time. Where was the South African Human Rights Commission and its anger when the human rights and dignity of those South Africans were violated? So what exactly is this body that selectively focuses almost exclusively on crimes involving suspected white perpetrators? The South African Human Rights Commission is an independent Chapter 9 institution. It draws its mandate from the South African Constitution by way of the Human Rights Commission Act of 1994. Chapter 9 organizations are essentially oversight bodies like the Auditor General and the Public Protector, for instance. So what do they do, aside from join public street protest? What is their mandate? Well, the South African Human Rights Commission is supposed to raise awareness of human rights, monitor and assess the observance of human rights, educate and train in human rights, address human rights violations, and seek effective redress. Aha! Now, that last one is how they get involved in suing private citizens. Well, how do they do that? Well, the South African Human Rights Commission has a legal services unit. The legal services unit is responsible for providing quality legal services for the protection of human rights in South Africa. Seems straightforward. The LSU endeavors to discharge its protection mandate of the commission through efficient and effective investigation of complaints of human rights violations. Only most of their investigations don't appear to be very efficient or effective. The provision of quality legal advice and assistance, as well as seeking redress through the courts for victims of human rights violations. They seek to foster an understanding and respect for human rights by addressing human rights violations or threats of violation, which includes making appropriate findings and recommendations to stakeholders. The investigation of complaints involves conducting public inquiries, issuing of subpoenas, and in loco inspections where necessary. Recourse to litigation occurs in instances where negotiations and mediation have failed or do not produce the required results. Well, who determines what the required results are? So basically what the South African Human Rights Commission is saying is that if they don't like the outcome of something, not whether it adheres to the law, if they don't like it, they're going to sue somebody. Recourse to litigation occurs in instances where negotiations and mediation have failed or did not produce the required results. Now, that is interesting. That is fascinating. So when exactly did the South African Human Rights Commission approach Ronaldo Groos for negotiation and mediation regarding the bogus allegations of racism directed to him by irresponsible media outlets and social media content creators? Did they approach Ronaldo? I'm not aware that they did. There's no mention of it on their website. No, they simply read yellow journalism, fake news, and because their natural instinct and inclination is to target white South Africans, minority South Africans, they just went with the story that he was a racist without having the facts. There was a rush to judgment, a rush to litigation, and this cost people money to defend themselves. Make no mistake, folks. South African Human Rights Commission is a body that seems not committed to its charter, but rather to fostering racial division through selective activity, focused almost exclusively on pursuing minority South Africans. Consequently, it undermines any credibility it may presume it has with the public. Let's allow the courts to sort this out. The presence of ANC and EFF political regalia at a rally, as I said, undermines the credibility that this is a genuine concern or anger over what happened to these women. And the presence of the South African Human Rights Commission in the protest further undermines the legitimacy of the whole thing. If these gentlemen committed this crime, allow the courts to pursue it and prosecute and convict them if they're guilty. That's how you handle this, not political machinations intended to divide South Africans based on race. Because make no mistake, folks, that's what the intent is here. The intent is to divide South Africans based on race. It's groups like these and political parties and so-called commissions that have racial agendas in South Africa of racial revenge. And that's what's going on here. Allow the courts to do their job. Meanwhile, where's your anger over the murder of those South Africans or the 26,000 that will be murdered this year in South Africa? Hey, South African Human Rights Commission, where's your anger? Thanks a lot, folks. Be sure to hit the like button. We'll catch you next time. God bless.